Welcome to episode 1 of Film Chats, conversations with Ottawa's film, TV, and media community, presented by Digi60 Filmmakers Festival. I'm Samphe Ballamingie, a student of sociology at Carleton University and an emerging filmmaker. Over the past few months, I've sat down with some fabulous professionals here in Ottawa to talk about issues of representation in the film industry. Today I'm chatting with Jafri. A few years ago, Eamon transitioned out of a career as a public servant into working in the film industry, where she earned accolades as a documentary filmmaker. Eamon achieved this by creating a successful personal brand, and she now works with her clients to do the same for them. Please enjoy this episode with Jafri. Thank you so much, Eamon, for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
I was wondering if you could maybe give us a little overview of when you first knew you wanted to get into filmmaking and visual storytelling.
I spent many years unhappy in my office job, and I was reading a bunch of career books and trying to figure out what my passion was and what my interests were. When you have certain strengths, sometimes it's hard to see them because they're so natural and easy for you. I've been interested in film and television my whole life, but I always dismissed it as a distraction, as something that was unimportant. I just thought, well, I will watch a lot of television. I don't think that means anything. It struck me that it was a theme in my life. I was always very fascinated reading about film and learning about all the stuff behind the scenes. And then what prompted me to get into actual filmmaking was I was just frustrated with Ottawa, being a young professional. And I thought, well, I'm going to channel this into something positive. And it occurred to me that I could do a documentary looking at Ottawa's reputation for being boring, and that could be something kind of fun to do. And that sort of kickstarted the journey. And I just sort of learned how to start doing things through that project. And then once I did that project, then another idea came to me for another film. And so it was just a very organic process of realizing, oh, this is something I'm interested in. This is something I think is maybe what I'm meant to do. I mean, maybe at this time in my life.
I love how you're like, oh, I'm frustrated with Ottawa. I'll make a documentary. I'll make a film about it.
Well, it's funny because I literally had a vision of me standing on street corners asking people what their thoughts were. Again, it's like that light bulb sort of moment. And then it excited me, and I thought, what? Okay, nobody's done anything on this topic. A lot of people have discussed the subject through articles and through, news pieces, but nobody had ever made a film about it. And then my whole point was, well, okay, people think it's boring. Well, then what do you want to do about it?
I'm wondering what that process was like to have that first creative endeavor where you're kind of putting your heart into this film.
I didn't know what I was doing. There's only so much help you can get doing Google searches, especially when you're trying to do a documentary. I'd say with any kind of film, I feel like you just have to do it. I took workshops at Saw Video. I started reading about film, but it was only when I started doing it and then I started making mistakes that when I look back now, I realize, wow, I learned so much. But in the midst of it, it felt very frustrating because you, of course, have the idea, but it's one thing to have the idea, then another thing to actually start implementing it. And so the way I started to map things out was, first I was trying to find collaborators.
How did you find those collaborators? And I mean, moving forward as well, like from that first project, how do you find collaborators?
Facebook groups, I don't know if it existed but nobody in the film community was really using it as a resource to find collaborators. So a lot of people are using Kijiji in Ottawa. And yeah, there still exists a film and television section, but you don't really, the opportunities you find on there are a little bit shady. So I wouldn't pursue them. But I basically just posted in there saying I'm looking for camera people to help me on this idea that I have, looking at Ottawa. And then I had several people contact me, and then I basically interviewed them, figuring out, what are you looking for, right? I mean, I didn't really know. So some of it was, and I still do this, relying a little bit on my intuition and how I felt about that person. And then, of course, their experience. And so that's a really important skill as well, is just I would say, for me, that's been very helpful, is listening to my gut and being able to trust myself even when logic dictates maybe another answer. I find I trust my instincts more.
Absolutely. And I mean, I'm sure the journey of like figuring out what you want in like a partnership, especially a creative partnership, would just be an ongoing, like continual process.
For people that want to find collaborators now, well, there are Facebook groups. That is unfortunately the best way for people that are not on Facebook. But, and hopefully there will be an alternative at some point, but a lot of people are part of the Ottawa Filmmakers Facebook group. And there's also one for across Canada called I Need a Producer Fixer crew. It's a very long name.
I need a producer fixer crew.
Yeah, like producer / fixer / crew. Canada. You have to add Canada because then you'll get the US one. But yeah, so that's another way people get hired for jobs, or even if they're just looking for volunteers, that's a really great resource.
And I liked what you said earlier about how you just had to get started, and like just even if you're going to make mistakes, even if you fail, like you just need to like get going and get your hands on a project. I'm wondering what your journey's been like in this industry. Like, has it been a linear path? Has it been more zigzagging?
Definitely zigzagging, because especially earlier on when I had so many ideas and I was just like, I wanted to hit the ground running because I felt like I'd lost so much time not knowing what I wanted to do with my life. And then all of a sudden I had all these ideas, right? Like I'd become creatively unblocked. And then it was like, okay, here's the idea. It looks great in your head. How do you get to that end result? And so that first project was really interesting, with the one on Ottawa, and just trying to learn through bits and pieces how you put together a documentary. And of course, it didn't look very pretty. There's so many mistakes in it. So then the next film I made, I thought, again, you're always looking at each project and going, okay, what were the lessons learned from that one, or what do I want to do better on the next one, or what do I want to learn on the next one? And so that first film, it was 30 minutes, and it took like 3 years to make, just between working a day job and managing everybody's schedules. And so anyway, so it ended up as 30 minutes. So I thought the next film I'll make something very simple, 5 minutes, and I'll just shoot it all on my own, edit on my own, so that I don't have to rely on anyone else's timelines, and I should just learn how to do that stuff on my own. Find with each film, like I'll have to look back at the lessons learned. So the next project that I'm doing now, one thing I hadn't done up to this point was apply for grants, or at least be very strategic in that whole process. And so I thought, okay, like this is how I want to approach this next film, is I really want to understand more of the business of filmmaking and producing and tax credits. And so I feel like that's a bit of a more manageable way to go about learning, because as many books as you might want to read, as many courses as you want to take, I feel like it's just one of those things. It takes time, and it depends on your personality and the way you like to work. But it is amazing when you look back, when you realize, okay, several years have passed, and I have grown, I have achieved things. So it feels really good. In the moment, it's hard though. It is hard.
It's really amazing to hear you talk about that growth, because I mean, as somebody who's just like in university, still like an emerging kind of filmmaker and visual storyteller, I'm always so scared to start projects, because I'm so scared of like it not being perfect and of having those mistakes. But I think every single time I do a project, I feel like I've learned something from it. So there's always value in it. So I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm not going to lie, like I want every project to be perfect too. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I mean, you do always want to strive to do your best. But yeah, it is, I don't think that goes away. Like you have certain ambitions, and there's a certain kind of quality that you want to achieve. But I do think every project, it naturally comes to its end stage, especially when you're editing and you say, okay, well, this is as far as I can take this thing. And at least, like for me, I'll get to a point where I go, I'm done. I'm done. I'm ready to move on to the next thing.
Definitely. I'm wondering, over your time in this industry, have you found that visual representation can reach people in a way that written word can?
Yeah, definitely. Well, I would say, especially with documentary, what I really like about documentary is that you're engaging more of the senses. So you can do a combination of text, oral storytelling, and visual storytelling. And I love that because, with the written form, or even if you just if you limit yourself to one of those elements, visual, text, or oral, then it kind of boxes you in, especially I find with, for example, with text or with writing, you have to explain every single thing that you're saying. Whereas with the visual, there's shorthands, right? Like sometimes you can convey the message through just one scene. Especially when you're trying to engage people, and people have different types and ways of learning and absorbing information. So I like that you're able to talk to them in different type of ways.
In terms of visual representation, when we elevate previously silenced voices, we bring to the fore just a broader range of stories and experiences. I'm wondering how we can ensure that these stories are getting told. In documentary filmmaking, but then also in filmmaking, it's a broader industry.
What I've really noticed is that it does make a significant difference when the crew when the people behind the scenes also match the people that are in front of the scenes. So if you're trying to tell a story that's specific to a certain community, then you need to have that reflected behind the scenes, especially with the people that have the most creative control on the project. And, a conversation that we've been having a lot is with Indigenous communities, right? You want to make sure that you have an Indigenous producer, an Indigenous director when you're telling the story of that community. And also if I'm coming up with an idea for a documentary, am I the right person to tell the story about that community? And I prefer to avoid it. I'd rather just stick with the communities that I can relate to, that I have experience in, because it doesn't make me feel comfortable. If I haven't gone through the same experiences as that community, then it just doesn't make sense. And it's also very evident in the storytelling. So I worked for a brief time at the Aboriginal People's Television Network, and we had an inbox for submissions from independent producers. And it was really obvious when you'd read a script or I can't remember what it was, like their story treatment, and they were not Indigenous themselves. And like there was something missing there. And even when I would sit with my manager to review submissions for acquisitions for films that had already been made and produced, and when we were doing the screening, I also picked up on that. When you see several films and then you see the films that are made by Indigenous creators, or more of the crew behind the scenes is Indigenous versus less so with other films, it's evident. It comes out in the film. Some jobs that I've had in film, I worked in a position where I was helping with casting a web series, and it was a branded web series, and so there's a client that's involved, and the client that the production company is making the series for, they have to address the client's needs, right? And the client also has say on who's being cast and the story. And so, my job was to look for families that of a specific industry. So I was looking for farmers. And I was looking in a specific province in BC. And in BC, there are a lot of Punjabi farming families. And so I thought, well, as somebody that's racialized, it makes sense for me to try to put that forth as a casting choice. But at the end of the day, it was a client's decision whether or not they wanted to go with a Punjabi family or with a standard white family. And they made their decision, right? But I still had to do my part. I thought, I have to give them the choice. But there again, you can see if I wasn't in that position and there was somebody else that wasn't of a racialized background, maybe they wouldn't make that choice. Like, to me, it would be so powerful to see somebody that's also South Asian on screen, right? So it's just always more of a priority in my mind than somebody else's. But yeah, it's like, so even on the client side, right? Like, if there were more people in the industry that were of diverse backgrounds, then maybe they would have made a different casting choice. So yeah, I found that really telling. And even just working in contracts in Toronto, where it's more than 50% of the population in Toronto that's of racialized backgrounds, but you don't see that reflected in the film and television industry at all. It's like almost like a different world versus just walking around in Toronto. So yeah, so I thought that was very interesting. It actually surprised me that in Toronto you didn't see more people of color working there, and who was at the top levels of all those organizations, right? And what kind of stories are they picking for their production companies, and how are they choosing to tell those stories?
I think that this just, you're really drawing on the importance of having representation amongst all crew members, and it affects what stories are being told.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think it should be tokenistic. I mean, I just think the reality is that when you're a storyteller, then you're going to tell the stories that reflect your own experiences. That makes complete sense. And so I don't think it should be a tokenistic thing where it's like, let's have like a rainbow of crew, but more like let's be open to telling different types of stories and hearing different types of stories. I was thinking about how art is really a mirror of our society. And when you don't see yourself reflected in art, then it can unknowingly subconsciously affect the way you perceive yourself and your role. So I mean, I think that's another reason why it is so important that, as our societies become more multicultural, then you see that in the arts industry and in that landscape as well. And I know, it's a complicated thing. I mean, part of it too is also, like, I come from an immigrant family, and no one, it just wasn't a realistic thing to work in the arts. Like, I didn't have any connection to the arts. I had no role models in my family of people that were working in the creative sector to say, oh, that's how you do it. That's how you start working. It's complicated, right? Like, if you don't grow up with that around you, then you're less likely to even aim for it. So it's almost like it's a two-way thing. Like, on the one hand, the industry needs to be more open and have opportunities for different types of people. But on the other hand, if those types of communities don't know how to access that world, then they're never going to even apply for those positions. And they're never going to they won't know how to navigate in that industry. Like, maybe they'll get a foot in the door, but then they don't know how to move on up.
Are there ways that industry gatekeepers can create better support for marginalized voices, or just for people who may not be lenient into going into this industry?
Yeah. I mean, I think what's really great right now is there are so many programs that are opening and trying to give that foot in the door to underrepresented communities. And that is so amazing, because I was talking to somebody and she was saying, she wished there had been more opportunities for women when she was working in the industry. So I think that is a really positive step. I think hiring people at the more senior levels in organizations is a very effective means to change who is hired within the industry, but also who is cast, and then again, like, what kind of projects are worked on. But it's tricky, right? It's like having a senior role, but also having a voice.
I think just like valuing stories equally, and like really.
Yeah, but even just encouraging, having incentives in place so that, like, if I could go back in time to my younger self, that, like, how would I talk to her and say to her, it's not just about taking art classes or film classes. There's so many other things that are involved if you want to make this your career. And so making that kind of information accessible to all kinds of kids and students. And I mean, like you hear now, I think even with elementary schools, like they're cutting arts funding, or that's always a story, right? But it's like, it's not even giving them the opportunity to practice it, but how do you realistically map your way into it? And I find that kind of information is really hard to understand and to know unless you actually talk to people, or you know them, or there's somebody in your family that does all of that. So yeah, like how do we change that? How do we encourage Canadians to be more entrepreneurial as artists? Like, you know, how do you start up a production company, and like how do you do all those things, right? Like, and it's tricky too, because you need time and you need a lot of extra income to do any of this stuff. Like it's a very privileged space.
And this leads me well into my next question, which is, I was watching your Creative Mornings talk, and I really liked how you talked about this concept of creative well-being. And so I'm wondering how you view your craft and how you manage to combine self-expression with a financial livelihood.
Yeah, that's something I'm still trying to figure out. So I feel like you had two questions there. What was your first one?
How do you view your craft, but more so in terms of combining self-expression with financial livelihood?
It was December 2017. Yes, that's what it was. Okay, so that's when I quit my job, because I had gone to, and that's what I discussed in that Creative Mornings piece, was I was realizing like my body and my mind were just saying like, you have to do something else with your life, because, you know, I was working in a 9-to-5 job. It was in the industry, but because I wasn't doing the creative work in my day job, I was still feeling very unfulfilled. And so I had no backup plan. I didn't have, you know, savings set aside. The only thing I did was I secured my line of credit before I quit my job. So the only thing that was available was a line of credit. And thankfully, you know, I do have a partner who has a steady income. And so the idea for me was quitting was, okay, I want to take more control of my career. I want to get out of this mindset that I've been stuck in for so many years, which is always have a day job and then do the art stuff on the side. And then somehow the art stuff will take off and then like everything will be fabulous, right? And it's not working. I don't feel happy with that setup. So what do I want to do? And so I have a vision board, and I kind of very loosely said, well, I want to start consulting and helping other creatives. That's one thing I want to do. Another thing is I want to get contracts in film and television, which are pretty short and temporary. Like that's just sort of the reality of it. And then the third piece is because of that, because I'm in control of my own schedule, then I want to use that to also be able to work on the projects that make me feel excited and motivate me. And so that was my very loose plan. And of course that year was kind of a mess, because there's so many times where I was just sort of twiddling my thumbs. And I also kind of wanted to take myself back like 10 years when I just finished university and I'd been offered a job in the public service. And I never really said, because, you know, I was very lucky. I was very fortunate to just start working right after graduating. But what if I hadn't made that choice? What if I'd taken a risk and done something crazy, like go to New York and just try to make it, right? Like I never really done that. So that was also part of that year when I quit, was like just pushing myself a little bit more and like trying different things and seeing if I could work somewhere outside of Ottawa. So yeah, so all I have to say, anyway, it's been an interesting journey. I still feel like I'm figuring out, I think compared to last year or 2019, whatever year it was, I am having a better sense of maybe what it takes to craft a career I'm more in control of, but it's very much a work in progress. And maybe a year from now, I'll be able to tell you like, yeah, I figured out the perfect kind of balance. But right now, what I'm really happy with is that I do still feel like I'm in control, where I'm not like I am still taking more risks than I ever have before.
Yeah. It's really inspiring for me to hear, because I feel like I'm in that point of transition where I'm just graduating university and I'm trying to navigate like, what's my next step? Like, do I want to move to Vancouver and like try to get a job on set? Do I want to try to start making films my own? So it's really wonderful to hear.
It's so exciting
your
too.
thought
Like I'm almost
process.
kind of jealous that you're in that position right now. I'm like, oh, if I can only go back. But yeah, no. But it's also stressful too, right?
Yeah, because it's taking a big risk.
Yeah, and then like no matter which path you take, you're going down a certain trajectory, right? And are you going to be happy with that? And it just feels like the weight of that and not knowing, that's also, I imagine, a bit of a stress.
Yeah, uncertainty I feel like is definitely a big stress just in this industry.
And of course the economy too, right? Like that's always the balance. Like, you know, the reality is that you will have bills to pay, or you do have bills to pay, and how do you balance that with wanting to be happy, and what's more important at certain points in your life.
How does it feel now to have turned your passion into your full-time career and job?
Yeah, like it's like different dimensions of myself. Because I like documentary film, and because the subjects I choose are never, they're not going to make money. Like they're not, you know, some people will craft a certain career for themselves where they'll say, well, I'm going to work on these kind of videos and I'm going to get contracts with businesses, and that's how I'll pay my bills, and then I'll use the money to work on stuff that really makes, like, you know, like there's different ways of doing it. And for me, like my way is knowing that the documentary projects I want to work on things that are really meaningful to me, and that make me feel like I'm giving, you know, like that's my contribution to the world, right? And then it makes me feel good about myself, but I know it's not going to pay my bills. And I think for me at this point, that's okay. And so then it's a question of, okay, well then how am I going to pay the bills without, you know, feeling miserable at some kind of day jobs? And what does that work look like? And am I feeling fulfilled by that? So yeah.
When we talk about finding meaning in our work, I'm wondering your thoughts on how we maintain honesty when personal branding kind of just dictates how we need to portray ourselves to the world. Well,
so it's interesting that you bring up personal brandings, because that's what I consult with artists and creatives on. And sometimes I get that question, and what I say to people is, no, I want your personal brand to be the impression you want to create. Like I want to put you back in control, not how people are labeling you or viewing you. And I don't want a personal brand also to be something that, like, you're worrying about crafting an image that allows you to make money and pay the bills. Like what I want it to be is, if money were not a question, what is it that's most important to you in this life and in your work and in conveying in your work? And that is what I think should help dictate people's choices, as well as hopefully the career opportunities that eventually come their way, because they're being very clear about what it is that they stand for.
Yeah. I think this idea of what matters to you if money isn't an object.
Yeah.
I think that's just the question everyone should ask themselves at some point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do think that we have that capability to start defining that in ourselves and in how we promote ourselves. And I mean, that's what's worked for me and helped me achieve certain opportunities, was because I've been clear about what my values are and what's important to me.
How can we create visual storytelling in a way that's more durable and long lasting? Because we live in this world that's like, images are so fleeting.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if it's, I mean, the reason the images are so fleeting is also because that's how our technology has structured things. So our brains are changing right now. Like I think they were doing studies recently that were showing how our brains are evolving and changing. So I wonder, do we need to do that, or is it just that we're in a state of transition right now, and so that's reflected in all the content that's coming out? And like maybe this is just this period of time where it feels very fleeting. They're already showing that the attention span between millennials and Gen Z is completely different. Like Gen Z have a much shorter attention span, but that's their brain, and like that's their reality. And so maybe that's okay, because I even just think back to I think was it like 20 years ago that the Blair Witch Project came out, and when that movie came out, it was so hard to watch because it seemed like it was edited so quickly and people were feeling nauseous in the theater. Like there were stories about that. Yeah, and now when you watch it, you're like, no, it looks fine. There's nothing.
It's like we have TikTok now. Like this is normal.
No, like the shaky camera, it's fine now. We're not bothered by it. So yeah, maybe we'll feel the same way about the content that's coming out right now. I do think some of it's just a dearth of too much content. I mean, I don't really watch that much. I actually watch YouTube more, but I have a hard time picking things on Netflix because there's just too much, and I don't even want to commit myself to anything because just the idea of like sitting for long periods of time when I'm already sitting at my computer for long, like it feels like too much. So
I even find like just how I'm viewing films versus TV shows is changing, because with TV shows, like I'm not committing to like 2 hours, and it's just it's interesting because I have to like, it's just interesting to navigate just how our attention spans are changing.
Yeah, I've always found that too, even just growing up. Like I always like television better than movies because, and especially now, I really don't want to go to a theater. Well, not necessarily a theater, but to pick the movie and then sit there for 2 hours. And then like with television and shorter content, you don't have to, or series at least, you don't have to discover a new world. You're just, you're familiar with the characters and it's just easier. Like you can just throw it on and then go do other things.
Yeah. I just talking about attention spans. I'm like, I'm on my phone, like watching a video on my phone, and then sometimes I'll have a video on my laptop, and it's just like, that's where I'm at with my attention span right now. It's just, I need constant.
It's true. And like even with mobile phones, so YouTube used to, they encourage creators to make really short content, like under 10 minutes. And now that's completely changed because mobile has completely changed the game. And so now YouTube is okay with videos that are like 30 minutes or like an hour because people will actually just sit there and watch things. Technology changes us, but then we change with the technology. And yeah, it's really interesting.
That's a really interesting point. I didn't know about that transition with YouTube and the YouTuber community. Yeah. Kind of a pivot, but I'm wondering what one thing makes you hopeful about the future of greater representation in the film and media industry?
Just the fact that there are so many more initiatives that are available now. If you, I guess, the best term to use is underrepresented voices. There are so many more opportunities, and then just even with the internet, and social media, it's so much easier to find out information about those opportunities. I really feel grateful that those things do exist, and that not just in Canada that you have access to them, but also sometimes even international ones. And yeah, so there's really a lot out there to help people get started. I find now because of social media, there's all these discussion groups and there's ways to ask people questions and quickly get that knowledge. And whereas maybe before that didn't exist.
Instagram seems like it's being a really great tool. I mean, like I saw like Euphoria put out a casting call over Instagram. Like Mindy Kaling put out a casting call for one of her projects over Instagram. It's interesting to see how it's used to like
That's so true.
Just like reach a wider audience.
Yeah. Like for actors, Instagram's really changing the game, and like people get hired just from their Instagram videos.
It's an interesting development.
Yeah, and even TikTok, that's becoming a bigger way of finding people to cast too.
I'm wondering what advice you may have for our listeners, either established or emerging, for breaking into this film and media industry and making a go of it financially, but also finding meaning in the work that they're doing.
I actually gave a talk at an arts conference in Chicago this past weekend.
Oh, wonderful.
Where I was sort of talking about this, like how it's hard to break in, but the advice that there is, I'll see if I can remember the 6 elements that I think you need to break into the arts industry, period, regardless if it's film or whatever. So the first one is research. So just getting a better understanding of what kind of jobs there are available, because there's the things that you see on the surface that everybody talks about, like the director and actor, right? But there's so many jobs on a film set, and not just a film set, but even the production office. And so digging into what those positions are, and outside of the library or a Google search, I would recommend doing things like pay attention to films, right? So look at the credits. If you can get access to extra features, like the way they used to do for DVDs, those are really great. I always find I've learned so much just listening to the voiceover commentary, or like they do those videos now with the New York Times and Vanity Fair. I think it's like notes on a scene with the directors. So those are
so much fun.
Yeah,
to watch.
Those are such great learning resources. If there's a certain position you're interested in, then contacting people in those positions and just emailing them questions or asking them for coffee to learn more about their industry. Those are other ways to learn. The other thing is to, like, networking is so important in the film industry. So if there's events like through Digi60, right? So if there's local events that are happening, or conferences or workshops, those are really great spaces to meet other people. Not just for you to learn as an individual, but to connect with the people that are around you, and to, like, again, they're probably people that you could learn from as well, and to stay in touch, because they could be your next collaborators as well for a film. The other big piece of advice, I'm not going to go through all 6, but another big piece of advice I'd give is to know that the self-doubt and the criticism that you have of yourself, of that voice in your head, it's never going to go away. So you just have to work through it. You have to work past it, and be nice to yourself, and maybe have a really good support network around you, of people that can help you feel good on those days when you're feeling down, when you feel like nothing's going to happen for you, you're not going to finish your film project, and you're not going to be whatever that voice in your head tells you. Just keep pushing through it, and
learning to coexist with that doubt.
And finish the cycle. Like, come up with that film idea, create the film, distribute it, like show it to someone. Okay, just complete the cycle. I really think that's very important for artists, is not just to come up with the idea and produce it, but also to show it to an audience, and then you can move on to the next project.
My very last question is, what are you working on now?
So I am working on a documentary about self-marriage, which is this trend that has been becoming more popular over the last few years globally. And so I'm going to follow a woman in Ottawa as she marries herself and plans for the wedding of her dreams. But I also want to use the film as a way to explore the stigma that single women often feel, and also just to explore the evolving institution of marriage and how it's changed over the years, and how it evolves with society. And so I'm trying to apply for grants for that right now, and I'd love to make it into a short, but also maybe a broadcast hour documentary. Yes, that's what I'm doing right now.
What a interesting project. I'm so excited to see it.
Hopefully it'll get done this year, but we'll see. It'll get done. I always complete my projects.
That's amazing. Well, thank you, Eamon, so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
We had a wonderful conversation.
That was my chat with filmmaker Eamon Jafri. I hope you enjoyed it. A huge shout out to our 2020 festival partner, Saw Video, for sponsoring the series. For more information about the festival, visit digi60.org. We'd like to keep the conversation going. Engage with us on Facebook at Digi60 Filmmakers Festival, on Twitter at Digi60 Fest, and on Instagram at Digi.60, and let us know what you would like to learn about next. I'm Samphe, and I'll chat with you soon.